Okay, so what we're going to do in the next hour and a half is spend 60 minutes in each of three groups, and you can self-select walking around to three tables. The topics, Jared has put it up here, is email, oh my gosh, it's still here, how are we going to cope with it? Secondly, internal and external social media, uh, is this a blessing or is it a curse? And then lastly, professional and personal information, uh, carrying on what Gloria spoke about in terms of physical and psychological attributes and how this all folds into our family life and professional life, which really seems to be seamless at this point in time, really moving from one domain to another. How do we deal with this new set of variety of information? So what we'd like you to do is to decide which of the three topics you'd like to sit at in the table. Hopefully it'll be around 10 persons each, but whatever it is, it is. So after chatting about this for 1 hour, then I'm going to give you, the heads up, say at 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes, we'd like each of the tables to select a communicator. And the communicator will indicate what is the area, the domain they were looking at. Secondly, what are the issues, say 2 or 3 issues, it doesn't have to be a long list. And then what are 2 or 3 either solutions that you're proposing or 2 or 3 research questions that either academe or industry should look at to try and deal with these issues. So it's, what's the topic, say 2 or 3 of the issues you looked at, 2 or 3 of solutions or additional research that's necessary. So each communications leader would come up front here and have maybe 5 minutes to express what the group has been talking about and have 5 minutes for Q&A from the entire group. Okay, so we'll start the clock now and we'll play musical chairs. Feel free to go to whichever table you would like. The tent cards are indicating what the topics are.
Social media is over here.
Right?
I guess that's email over there, is that right? Or no?
Yes, it's email there.
Email
over
there and personal,
Personal,
professional
professional,
in the middle. Okay.
A very, very interesting discussion on personal versus business information. We defined it to be specifically publicly available personal information versus business information, such as the type that exists on Facebook, LinkedIn, on the interwebs, and other things, as opposed to stuff that you've somehow inexplicably managed to keep confidential for a period of time, however unlikely that may be. So the question we formulated at the end, and I'll explain this, is should a company promulgate a policy of work-life balance for its people that includes business and personal information? In other words, is there a separation of church and state between the two? My personal point of view was, yes, there should be a complete separation of personal and business information because it's a form of harassment. It opens up the possibility of a form of harassment where your employer could coerce you to leverage personal connections that you simply don't feel comfortable leveraging, and it would just be inopportune, to put it mildly. So we put together 3 areas. Oh, you do this backwards. Okay, you have to scroll through. I just scrolled counterintuitively. Sorry, at least for me. Obviously, for the rest of the world, it's probably perfectly intuitive. 3 areas that require further investigation. Just gonna move this over so I can read and be within your point of focus. Publicly available personal information. In other words, how is that to be handled? If it's publicly available but personal, is that fair game or not? Use of company systems for personal use. We've had, both of our companies, a very, very strict policy that you do not use your work computer, work email, or anything else, or personal business, whatever it may be. I mean, incidental personal stuff, I'll be home at 5, I'll be home at 7. Stuff that's incidental, that's fine. but not to be encouraged. But essentially, if you have personal things to say it somewhere else. And we've done that mostly for the protection of the employee, not for us. And third, which I think is a very, very important question, is your personal information fair game for your employer? That goes back to the statement I made earlier. Does your employer even have the right to suggest that you should be leveraging a personal connection that you are eminently uncomfortable with, and I'm coloring that deliberately, I'm not being at all biased in this part of the conversation, for a business goal which you may or may not agree with? So what I'd like to do is take a quick poll around the room just to see, do you think that the separation of business, if you raise your hand if you think it's necessary and wise to separate business and personal information in the manner that we've been describing? Well, that table is very much in favor of it. That table is pretty much against it. Yeah, okay, good point. Sit down, Neil. That table doesn't count. We want to pull these two tables now. Okay, so it was actually about a 50-50 vote. Then I don't have your password now, Eric. Sorry. Could you just tell everybody your password publicly so we can, yeah. I have a separate laptop I'm taking to China with me because any technology equipment that goes to China, we have to sort of spray Lysol through when it comes back, and my password on that system is 22 characters long. Going back to this question, again for the room. Should a company promulgate a policy of work-life balance, regardless what the policy says? Should there be a policy that addresses and includes the topic of business and personal information, regardless of what it says, to appease this table here with troublemakers? If the question is, should there be a policy? If you think yes, there should be a policy of some sort, raise your hand. Well, finally, okay, that was about 70% of the room said yes. Yes, I have 2 questions left. Thank you, Marty. Can I ask the people who voted against this to explain why you're against it? I'm sorry, part of the deal of being against it is you're allowed to be on the spot. We don't have a policy of that. Thank you.
Are you referring to against having that, which one?
Should there be a policy, regardless of what the policy says, that addresses the question? No. And the person who just said no, the reason for which is?
I say no because, one, there already are laws like that. And 2, business, the enterprise wants more social, personal types of behaviors inside.
I'm not saying what the policy should or should not say. I'm saying should there be a policy. And I'm not aware of any law that actually regulates that.
I think there should be clarity no matter what the business says. We will use your information or we will not use the information.
Well, that's a policy. That's a policy. I mean, if there's transparency, if you're saying something, there's, a policy.
Particularly with bring your own device to work.
That's a huge challenge, right?
Even more mixed up. So there should be a policy so people know what's going to be used and what's not.
Okay.
And whether to bring your device.
And the law concerns whether you're an employee or a consultant. It's brought that up here because they like to hire people as consultants when they're employees, and it's not.
Yeah, that's a different problem. I think I've said all that we need to say. I just need to see if there are any questions before I go to the next table. Thank you.
Excellent. So we did social media, and we were trying to, we talked about a lot of different points. Social media, mostly internal in an organization, how it's used, what are the strong points, what are the weak points, and we came up with a lot of just small different points that I just want to share with you all to kind of get your mind going on it. So a few of the things that we discussed, first of all, we remarked that in a lot of cases, when you insert social media internally into an organization, you have very low adoption rates. And a couple of the reasons that that Josh from HP shared is that there's an unclear value proposition. People don't know why I should use it, why I should contribute to it, and there are uncertain expectations for using a social tool in a professional environment. You know, how am I supposed to act? How am I supposed to behave? But the flip side of that is that the use of social media in an organization is typically, it can be viewed as a flattener. It can be viewed as a less political way to reach up. If you have a question for your CEO, you're not going to go and email your CEO. You're going to get in trouble if you do that. But if you do that through your social media tool, oftentimes because it's social media, that's an okay thing to do. So that's acceptable. That was an interesting point. So how that impacts you as an individual or as a CEO, as far as overload goes, that could differ, but it's an interesting usage of the tool. A couple other things that we talked about. First Strain shared how they implemented social media, how they got penetration into people's lives. They did it by treating it like email. It was siloed, it was private. People got in and they actually started using it, and then they flipped the switch. A little bait and switch there. That was an interesting way to get things into it. So that was an interesting thing to hear about. It was defined that email is often used for tasks or formal coordination. Social media can be used for knowledge, for sharing knowledge, and SMS actually is used a lot for urgent coordination, for informal coordination. And so these three things kind of have different categories that they sit in. Let's see, and probably one of the biggest points that came out of our discussion was that social media in the enterprise should not be called social media, because when you call it social media, you attach all of this baggage to it. You attach expectations or lack of expectations, and people don't know how to deal with it. So if you don't call social media in your organization social media, there's a potential for more usage, for more success, for more value bringing to the organization or for other people. So those are just some of the points that we came up with that we thought were pretty interesting. So any thoughts or questions?
Is there any suggestions for what it should be called?
A collaboration tool.
The alternative is also fairly intriguing, as you call everything social media. The building is social media, the table is social media, the air, you can hear my voice is social media. Email is definitely the granddaddy of all social media. Let's face it, you've got people communicating, interacting with people. So the hijacking the term in 2004 really emerged. This is a bit unfair. I mean, the CEO or head of personnel at HP has, John's treating this new collaborative system. We want people to collaborate more. It's a social media system. And I said, no, buy a new sofa for the break room. That's social media. And that's what you got to think about. They're called social objects. Anything that gets people to interact around a particular topic are social media.
Great point. Thank you. All right. Anything else? Great. Next table.
So at the email table, we had a lot of non-millennials, people who are still using email, and therefore our discussion was perhaps biased because of that. And first thing we did was we decided what topics we want to talk about, and these were the topics. Is email going away? And being who we, say that again? Closer? Okay. So is email going away? And we concluded that email was really not going away because it's really simple to use. It's very easy to send a lot of email to a lot of people. So it's very convenient. And a lot of times it's also going to serve as legal record, which is something that you're not going to see in other media or other forms of communication. So it's something easy to search and say, hey, I sent you an email on such and such date and you didn't send me stuff back. So that's why it's important. So we then went into talking about what was wrong with email. Since it was not going away, we wanted to find out what was wrong with it. And we had a lot of pet peeves about it. People talked about how we just use reply alls, and subject lines are not consistent with the content of the emails. People talk about multiple topics in the same email, and the appropriateness of using the email when you should be actually using a telephone, or maybe calling a meeting, or maybe texting somebody. And also, a lot of people were, um, thinking about whether the value of the email is appropriate for the interruption it causes. So there's a lot of times you get emails and you get interrupted and you get annoyed because the email is just not important. Those were the pet peeves for the emails. And many of them resulted not really from the email system itself, but the human factor. And that's where I think importance of appropriate usage and training was a topic that we discussed, that people need to be trained. We assume that people know how to use email these days, and there are certain corporations who do training, but it's not very common. Another suggestion was maybe we can take, then we talked about how can we improve this email system now that it's not going away. And we talked about maybe there should be a market-based approach. So when you send an email, you need to pay. Um, the people wanted ability to prioritize emails or batch emails so you don't get interrupted. Some people wanted visual tools so they can be categorized. Are these newsletters? Google has this, but wanted to know these emails came from very important people. So I see a little blob there saying these are the ones that I need to use them, read first. And some other emails where, if they came from Amazon and other social tools, etc., maybe I'll attend to them later. And another important, or not important, useful feature desired for email is ability to send it to other applications, such as I got an email and I want to send it to my to-do list, or I want to send it to, which is perhaps there in many cases, but I want to send it to my blog, I want to send it to my social site, Facebook, etc. So those were some of the features that we talked about which would be useful in the email systems. I'll invite my group to talk about any points I may have missed here. Anybody wants to? All right. So, questions?
Yes. And just to make sure it's not missed on the recording, I brought a mic. Don't take this personally, but I have huge issues with some of the things you brought up. I don't think that people know how to use email, and I don't think email is much more than a flash in the pan and is not here to stay. 30 years of people using email has demonstrated that people fail miserably at using email. We haven't seen any tremendous improvement. In fact, the situation is just getting worse and worse and worse. People abuse email. People think nothing of sending hundreds of emails to some of their closest friends at a clip. Just to give you a quick stat from our research, for every 100 unnecessary emails you send, 8 man-hours of time are lost based on the recovery time that all those interruptions take. Finally, the technology you spoke about, sending emails to other tasks, has existed for about 25 years in Lotus Notes and other apps. So I don't mean to completely decimate the argument, but there are a few holes in it. I guess I didn't have a question.
That's right. But we did conclude that it was really a human factor. People not knowing how to use email, how to use email appropriately or not knowing how to use all the features that are provided by the email clients that are currently available. That's the problem.
It's not featured, it's common sense. Don't send 5,000 people an email when 2 will do.
I would just remark that Jonathan is precisely correct, but we also in the group we reasoned that the cost benefit analysis has led us to where we are today. It's like the automobile. 40,000 people killed mercilessly every year, but hey, nobody's going to give up their car. You know? What other thing besides cancer and heart disease kills so many people?
Walking into traffic while multitasking while you're holding your phone.
That's right. No, I completely agree. I think the trade-offs, the problems were the benefits far away. Jonathan, one thing that came up is I was surveying this. We've been at this for a long time. No one mentioned problems with spam. No one mentioned problems with security. No one mentioned the biggest problem from email coming out in the late 80s, that our IP was going to fly out the door because everyone was going to send our precious intellectual property out. Those things never, well, they materialized, but they were never, they've been solved by, in my opinion, by adaptation. So I think you're completely right, but so are people here that see it as a behavioral and protocol and adaptation problem as well. I would love to see it go away. My number one problem was I want less email, period. Less email, less problems.
It's very conciliatory, John, but I still think that if you have this like problem that we used in 20+ years, it's not going to be solved by this, like we have to use. We're talking basic features.
No one's trying to solve it because
That was the one of the thesis statements.
how do we cope? It's not really solve it.
That was right, but that was the thesis statement.
All right, this is a good conversation to continue over break. I want to thank all of the tables for all your hard work, and we will try and capture the essence of some very interesting comments off of the tape and circulate this back to you, and next year in 2015 Overload, see what the progress is on this. So let me hand this